I've learned, in the years since this happened, that the quietest places carry the loudest secrets. And the forest behind St. Luke's Church, God help me, was never quiet again after that night. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear the wet leaves whispering under my boots, the branches creaking like old bones, the low hum of something unseen watching from the undergrowth. But back then, I was just the sheriff, a man of routine, a man who believed that mysteries had explanations, normal explanations. I wasn't ready for what waited behind the chapel. I don't think anyone could be. It started with a call from Pastor Alden, just past midnight. Rain was tapping against the roof of my cabin, slow and steady, the kind of rain that makes you want to stay in bed and let the world solve its own problems. The phone jolted me awake, vibrating on the nightstand with a persistent urgency. Sheriff Hawthorne? The pastor's voice trembled. I think someone's behind the church. Someone, I muttered. At this hour? He inhaled sharply. Not someone. Something. I sat up straighter. What did you hear? Footsteps, he whispered. Heavy ones, snapping branches, and a sound I don't know how to describe. He hesitated long enough for my mind to wander to places I would later regret. And you want me to come out? I asked. Yes, please. I can't go back there alone. I dressed quickly, holstered my sidearm, and stepped into the damp darkness of the night. The drive to St. Luke's took 8 minutes, but the road felt longer, windswept, slick with rain, lined with trees that leaned inward like eavesdropping giants. The church sat at the edge of town, a small white building from the 1800s with a modest steeple and a graveyard older than any living resident. A single lantern glowed near the entrance, its light barely cutting through the fog. Pastor Alden waited on the porch, shivering under his coat. It came from the back, he said, pointing with a trembling hand. Somewhere near the old trail. Now that trail, I knew it well. Kids used it to sneak out of Sunday service. Hunters used it to cut through the ridge. And the elders in town? They warned never to follow it past the second bend. Forest remembers things, they'd say. I used to think it was just superstition. We walked around the side of the church. The night pressed close. Fog drifted between the trees like wandering ghosts. Moisture clung to my skin, cold and persistent. The ground smelled of wet leaves and something faintly metallic. We reached the edge of the woods. Show me where you heard the noise, I said. The pastor pointed again, but stayed close behind me. He clearly didn't want to step into the tree line. Couldn't blame him. The moment my boots crossed onto the trail, something shifted, like the forest tightened around us. Listening. Branches were broken, fresh, sharp breaks, some twisted unnaturally. The bark of several trees had long gouges, vertical, rough, claw-like. Not bare scratches. Too high, too deep, too deliberate. Pastor Alden murmured, "Do you see that?" He pointed at a maple tree near the edge of a slope. Symbols, carved cleanly into the bark. Not initials, not vandalism. No, these were deliberate. 3 vertical lines, a circle beneath, a spiral etched deeply enough to glisten with sap. I leaned closer. The grooves were fresh. The smell of shredded bark lingered in the cold air. Something had made these recently, very recently. "Pastor," I said quietly, "how long has this been here?" His voice cracked. "I've never seen it before tonight." I felt a prickling along my spine. Something about the symbol tugged at a memory. Not a clear one, but a whisper, like I'd seen similar markings long ago in old half-forgotten books. We kept following the trail. The deeper we went, the more the woods seemed to swallow sound. Even our footsteps felt muted. No insects, no owls, not even wind. Just the faint echo of the church bell far behind us, tolling once every so often in the breeze. Felt wrong. After about 10 minutes, the trail dipped into a narrow ravine, where thick roots tangled across the path like veins under pale skin. The air grew cold, unnaturally cold. I could see my breath. "I don't like this," the pastor whispered. "Stay behind me." We rounded a bend, and the canopy opened. I stopped dead in my tracks. Clearing. Circular. Ancient. The ground bare except for moss-covered stones arranged around the edges like crude seats. And on the far wall of the ravine, carvings. Hundreds of them. Symbols etched into the stone itself, weathered by centuries of rain and wind, yet still sharp enough to see. I stepped forward, lantern raised. The pastor covered his mouth in shock. The carvings depicted tall figures towering over humans. Lines of worshippers kneeling. A creature massive, broad-shouldered, hairy, standing at the center of the circle. Spirals and eyes and runes that didn't match any indigenous language I recognized. And worst of all, human shapes merging into something else. Becoming something else. Becoming it. I felt something crack inside me. This can't be real, I whispered. This shouldn't exist. And yet there it was, carved into the stone long before any of us were born. The pastor whimpered behind me. Sheriff, look. He pointed at the ground. The footprint. Massive. Deep. Fresh. Water pooled inside it from the recent rain, but not enough to blur the edges. 5 toes. Human shape. Impossible size. My throat closed. Something had been here. Recently. Tonight. The atmosphere changed again. Thicker, pressing down on my lungs, making every breath feel like an intrusion. I lifted my camera to document everything. The moment the shutter clicked, a violent dread surged through me. Pure instinct, like I had broken a rule older than the church itself. A branch snapped. Loud. Close. Too close. The pastor grabbed my arm. Sheriff. Run, I said. Now. But even as we fled back toward the church, I knew something else. Whatever had left that footprint, whatever had carved those ancient symbols, was still somewhere in that forest. Watching, waiting, following. And the moment I took those photos, I made myself part of the story. I didn't sleep the night we discovered the clearing. Even after I dropped Pastor Alden at the church door and told him to stay inside until sunrise. Even after I locked myself in my cabin and shut every curtain. Every time I closed my eyes, those carvings rose behind my eyelids like they were waiting for me. I kept seeing the spirals, the tall figures, the kneeling lines of humans, the carved creature standing at the center like some ghastly deity. And worst of all, the merging figures, human becoming something else, something towering, something wild, something sentient. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, staring at the photos I'd taken, each one worse than the last. The stone carvings were too old to date with certainty, but something about them felt impossibly ancient. Older than the church, older than the townsfolk, older than the written history of the region itself. As the morning light bled through the blinds, I realized something strange. Every photo I took seemed darker than the clearing had been, as if the camera captured more shadow than I remembered, as if the carvings wanted to hide themselves again. I returned to the clearing the next morning, alone. The church bell was ringing when I parked. 3 slow tolls, though it wasn't any hour for service. Fog clung to the ground like it had grown roots overnight. Sunlight tried to push through the clouded sky, but only made everything look sickly pale. With every step into the woods, the quiet deepened. No birds, no wind, no distant highway hum. Only the soft crunch of wet leaves under my boots and my own breath fogging in the cold pockets of air between the trees. The trail was as disturbed as before. Broken branches, claw-like gashes in the bark, heavy impressions in the mud. But now that I was alone, something else was obvious. These weren't the marks of a wild animal. The spacing was too deliberate, the path too purposeful, like something knew exactly where it wanted to lead. I followed the signs deeper and deeper until the trees opened into the clearing again. And the instant I stepped into the circle, my stomach dropped. Because in the daylight, the carvings looked different. More detailed, more human. I approached slowly, lantern in one hand, camera in the other. The carvings on the left side of the rock wall showed tall figures. Not entirely human, but not beast either, standing above groups of smaller people. Their posture wasn't hostile. I saw hands touching foreheads, kneeling figures, some kind of ritual or contact. Not worship, not fear, recognition, connection. But on the right side, the imagery changed, figures being restrained, bodies stretched, limbs elongated, faces distorted in expressions of agony. Dark shapes overseeing it all, human silhouettes holding implements in shapes I recognized far too well. Needles, scalpels, syringes, experiments. I raised my lantern, lighting the carvings further down. A man, clearly human, stood in the center of one scene. Around him, carved lines radiated outward like ripples from a stone thrown in water. People reached toward him. Others recoiled. But above him, at the top of the panel, the tall creature hovered like an overseer. The merging was depicted in excruciating detail. Human features twisting, bone structure shifting, hair spreading, hands growing longer, jaw elongating, eyes widening. Transformation. Not a myth. Not evolution. Not a legend whispered around campfires. Process. I stepped back, breath caught in my throat, a cold sweat forming along my spine. Something about this wasn't ancient folklore. It wasn't symbolic. It looked like a record, a warning, or a history lesson carved in stone. And then I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. Fresh carvings. A single line of symbols added at the far edge of the panel, cleaner cuts, sap still oozing from the edges. They hadn't been here 24 hours earlier. Something had been here again. Recently. Maybe while I was sitting awake all night staring at my photos. And whatever had added the symbols, it wasn't done. I turned to leave the clearing and froze. The footprint. Fresh. Huge. Pressed into the mud directly behind me. Not the one we saw last night. This one was deeper. Even larger. The water pooled inside it hadn't settled yet. Something had stepped here minutes ago. No seconds. The woods groaned around me. Branches shifting under unseen weight. I couldn't identify the direction. Felt like the sound came from everywhere. Then a crack. A deep one. Like something large leaning against a tree. I held my breath. Sheriff. A voice, distant and trembling. I turned to see Pastor Alden at the edge of the clearing. Fear written on every line of his face. You shouldn't be here, I said quietly. I heard something following me, he whispered. Something heavy. Get back to the church, I told him. Now. He hesitated. Did you find more? Yes, I said. Too much. Another branch snapped deeper in the trees. Loud and deliberate. The pastor flinched. I didn't take my eyes off the treeline. Go, I repeated. Run. And he did. I listened until the sound of his footsteps vanished, swallowed by the forest. Then I bent down, wiped the mud from the footprint, and took another photo, hands shaking. The instant the shutter clicked, a sense of dread punched through me. Hard, instinctual, something new, something understood that I had captured evidence, that I had taken something that didn't belong to me. I backed out of the clearing slowly, never turning my back on the treeline. Every step felt heavier than the last, every breath too loud. The air thickened with the feeling of being watched, one of the most primal sensations a human can feel. And then, just as I reached the trail, I heard it, a low, heavy exhale, like lungs the size of barrels pushing out cold air. Not a growl, not animalistic, more like a sigh, or the sound of something thinking, reflecting, remembering. I should have destroyed the photos, should have thrown the camera into the river, should have pretended the carvings didn't exist. But I didn't. I drove straight to the station, locked myself inside my office, and uploaded the files to the evidence system. All of them, every image, every angle, every footprint. And that was the moment everything changed. Not even 2 hours after I submitted the report, headlights swept across the station lot. Then another pair. Then another. Unmarked. Tinted. Government. They moved fast. Too fast for a simple investigation. Too fast for something that should have been local folklore at best. Somebody somewhere had been waiting for this, and I had just sounded the alarm. I heard engines shutting off, car doors slamming, boots hitting pavement with military precision. Dozens of them. Far too many for any normal containment operation. Before I could reach the front door, they opened it themselves. 5 men in dark uniforms stepped inside. No badges, no names, no insignias, only cold, expressionless faces. One of them spoke. "You're Sheriff Hawthorne." Not a question. "Yes. You filed a report regarding unauthorized symbols and anomalous findings behind St. Luke's Church." Also not a question. I nodded slowly. "We're here for your evidence," he said. My pulse kicked into overdrive. "What authority?" He cut me off. "This is no longer a local matter." Behind him, 2 agents moved toward my office. I tried to step forward. The lead agent placed a firm hand on my chest. "Sheriff," he said calmly, "for your own safety, do not interfere." And then, "You found something that was never meant to be found." The air went cold. My palms began to sweat. Another agent stepped out of my office holding my camera. Another held a hard drive. Another held a folder with my printed photographs. "All materials secured," one of them said. "Good," the lead agent replied. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "For your sake, Sheriff, forget what you saw." But the fear in his eyes told me one thing clearly. He had seen the carvings before. He knew exactly what they meant. He knew what was in those woods, and he was terrified of it. If I'd had any doubt, any naive sliver of belief that the government was simply curious or cautious, it vanished the moment they stepped inside my station. These weren't analysts. These weren't park rangers. These weren't archaeologists or historians. These were men trained to erase things. The kind of men who operated on the edges of legality, sanctioned by signatures none of us would ever see. The lead agent, tall, sharp jaw, eyes like cold steel, watched as his team stripped my office bare. They didn't ask permission. They didn't apologize. They moved with the precision of people following a protocol drilled into muscle memory. A protocol designed for containment. One man unplugged my station computer. Another photographed the crime scene board on my wall, even the notes unrelated to the carvings, as if anything I touched was now a loose end. A third man sealed my camera in a black case with yellow biometric locks I'd never seen before. And still, the lead agent kept watching me. Not aggressively, not suspiciously, almost pityingly. When the hard drives were removed and packed away, he exhaled, shook his head slightly, and said, "You should have stopped walking when you saw the first symbol." I swallowed the anger rising inside me. "You should have warned this town before people stumbled onto something dangerous." He blinked, slowly, as if weighing my words. "There are things," he said, "older than the founding of this country, older than the church behind which you walked, older than every myth humans turned into bedtime stories." He paused. "And some of those things don't want to be remembered." He motioned for his men to continue. "But we don't work for them," I said, unable to stop myself. "We work for no entity you have jurisdiction to question," he snapped, voice low, controlled. "And right now, Sheriff, you are compromising the safety of this region by asking questions you are not equipped to understand." Another agent stepped close and whispered something into his ear. The lead agent nodded. Then he turned back to me. "Where is the pastor?" "Why?" I asked immediately. He raised an eyebrow. "Pastor Alden saw the same carvings. That makes him a liability." My fists clenched behind my back. "I advised him to stay home," I lied. The lead agent studied my expression. A long, uncomfortable moment passed. "Good," he finally said. "Then keep him there." He stepped back. Then he dropped the hammer. "After today, you will not attempt to revisit the forest. You will not ask questions. You will not repeat or describe what you saw. And you will not interfere with federal land acquisition." I stared at him. "Federal what?" "Acquisition," he repeated. "The land behind St. Luke's is being reclassified. Effective immediately. That land belongs to the church." "Not anymore." Behind him, 2 agents carried a metal sign to my desk and leaned it there. A large white sign with bold black letters. Restricted land, federal property. Absolutely no trespassing. Violators will be detained. My stomach sank. You had these signs ready, I said. The agent held my gaze. I told you. You found something that wasn't meant to be found. Then, more quietly, and we were already watching it. Cold prickled across my skin. You knew, I said. You knew something was happening behind that church. He said nothing, which was answer enough. The agents filed out of the station like a tide, pulling everything with it. Holding my equipment, my evidence, my report, every shred of proof that the carvings existed. One man taped a sealed order to the station wall. All investigation materials classified. Sheriff Hawthorne is relieved of duty on this matter. No further inquiry permitted. When the door finally closed behind them, the station went dead silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights felt muted. I walked to my desk. Empty, clean, sterile. All that remained was a single envelope. My name on the front, written in thick dark ink. Inside was a short typed letter. Sheriff Hawthorne, for your safety, do not return to the forest. This is your only warning. SRC Division. Classification level, Obsidian. Obsidian. I'd never heard of that classification in my life. Within hours, everything changed. Unmarked vehicles lined the church road. Agents in gray uniforms set up barriers. Drones buzzed through the trees. Heavy equipment was unloaded. Portable floodlights, thermal scanners, soil tents. By noon, a 10-foot steel fence had gone up around the entire back forest. Locked gates, padlocks, motion sensors. The church congregation was forced indoors. Alden wasn't allowed past the porch. At 2 p.m., a delivery truck dropped off more signs. Dozens of them. By sunset, the forest was walled off like a quarantine zone. And nobody, nobody, was allowed inside. The strangest part? No one protested. Not really. The congregation looked relieved. Terrified, yes, but relieved. As if some part of them had always suspected this day would come. Alden pulled me aside, hands shaking. Sheriff, what are they doing? What they planned on doing long before we ever saw the clearing. He paled. Then the carvings, the ancient symbols they already knew? I nodded. They didn't want the truth uncovered. They wanted it contained. Alden looked toward the fence, and for a moment I thought he might collapse. What about the creature? He whispered. We didn't see a creature, I said quickly, but the words felt hollow in my mouth, because both of us had heard the breathing that night. Both of us had seen the fresh footprint. Both of us had felt watched. Alden looked at me with eyes full of something I couldn't name. You don't believe that, he said softly. No, I admitted. I don't. I thought that would be the end of it. The government takes over. The land becomes restricted. Life moves on. But life didn't move on. Not for me. Not for the church. Not for the town. Strange things began to happen almost immediately. At night, the workers inside the barrier claimed to hear footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, moving through the forest. Spotlights flickered. Drones malfunctioned. 2 agents went missing and were never acknowledged. The signs at the fence changed wording 3 times in a week. From federal property, keep out, to restricted zone, no entry, to quarantine area, biohazard risk. But the forest didn't feel sick. It felt alive, aware, angry. And as for me, I couldn't forget the carvings. I couldn't forget the symbols. I couldn't forget the feeling of being watched. Most of all, I couldn't forget that fresh footprint. One night, I found myself standing outside the fence in the dark, rain pouring over me, staring into the shadows of the trees. Something moved behind them. Something large. Something slow. Something deliberate. Something that paused when it noticed me. The agents didn't see it. I did. And in that moment, the truth hit me harder than anything Elias Turner ever said. The carvings weren't just history. They were memory. They were identity. They were origin. And the creature who made them was still there, still watching, still remembering, still waiting. I don't know what finally broke inside me. Maybe it was the government's silence. Maybe it was the way the woods grew stiller and colder each night, as if the trees themselves were bracing for something. Maybe it was the memory of that fresh footprint, deeper than anything I'd ever seen. Maybe it was the fact that ever since they fenced off the forest, I'd been waking in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, certain, absolutely certain, that something was calling me back there. Whatever the reason, it happened 3 weeks after the land was declared restricted. Rain hammered my cabin roof like frantic fingers. Lightning flickered behind the mountains, illuminating the ridge in brief flashes of ghostly white. And in the brief silence between thunderclaps, I could hear it, a sound deep in the distance, a low, resonant exhale, like lungs older than language drawing breath, a sound from the forest. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. I knew what I had to do. I threw on my jacket, strapped a flashlight to my belt, grabbed my old service revolver. Not that I believed it would matter, and drove towards St. Luke's with the rain blurring everything into streaks of silver. The church loomed through the storm like a relic from another century. No lights, no congregation, just a quiet building standing vigil at the edge of a forbidden world. Beyond it, the fence, the floodlights, the perimeter sensors. I parked behind the church, killed the engine, and stepped into the storm. Rain soaked through my clothes instantly. The ground had turned to mud, clinging to my boots with each step. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, I saw something move behind the fence. A shape, tall, broad, silent, watching me. I didn't hesitate. I found the gap in the fence, the one I'd noticed a week earlier where the metal had bent outward from the inside, as if something had pushed through with immense strength. I slipped through, and the woods swallowed me whole. The transformation was immediate. The moment I stepped past the fence line, the forest fell silent. Not just quiet, but silent. The rain felt muffled. The wind refused to enter. My own heartbeat sounded too loud. The air grew colder with each step, pockets of icy wind slithering between the trees like invisible serpents. Fog clung to the branches. The ground squished beneath my boots. I approached the trail behind the church, the one I'd walked 100 times as a child, long before any of this. Back then, it had simply been a shortcut to the river. But now, the trail felt like a wound in the earth. Muddy impressions dotted the ground. Some small boot prints from agents, others large, impossibly large. I followed the biggest ones. The deeper I walked, the more the carvings burned in my mind. Couldn't shake them. Not the tall figures, not the merging forms, not the ritual spiral that seemed to pulse like something alive. Thunder rolled above me, distant but constant, like something enormous walking through the sky. The woods seemed to hold its breath. Then I heard it. Not breathing, not footsteps, something worse. The soft scrape of fingers brushing stone. Ahead, near the clearing, my chest tightened. I moved slowly, each step careful, trying not to alert whatever was there. Lightning cracked overhead, white and violent. For an instant, the clearing lit up like a stage. And I saw it. A silhouette alone before the carved rock wall. Tall at least 8 feet. Broad shoulders. Hair matted by rain. Arms so long they nearly touched the ground. Head bowed slightly as if reading or remembering. Its hand, a massive, thick-fingered hand, traced one of the carvings with a gentleness that didn't match its size. The carving of the first transformation. Human merging with something monstrous. Something ancient. The creature didn't just see it. It recognized it. Lightning faded. Darkness swallowed us again. My breath caught in my throat. My knees felt weak. My flashlight remained off. My instincts screamed not to shine light on it, not to break whatever fragile moment I had stumbled into. The creature breathed, slow, heavy, deliberate, but not aggressive. There was something tragic in the shape of its posture, something unbearably human. A sorrow I could feel even from a distance. Touched another carving, the one of the tall figures teaching or anointing the humans, and it let out a sound. A low, rumbling hum, not a growl, not an animal call, a note, a tone. like a memory trying to rise through a throat not shaped for speech. I clapped a hand over my mouth. I had heard that sound once before, weeks earlier, outside my cabin. I hadn't known what it was then. I knew now. The creature shifted. Slowly, deliberately, and then it turned. The motion was fluid, quiet. This massive weight made almost no sound. And suddenly, it was facing me. I froze. The creature didn't charge, didn't roar, didn't retreat. It watched. We stood there, two figures in a ring of ancient history, meeting in the center of something older than scripture, older than the town, older than the land itself. A second flash of lightning split the sky, and the creature's face was illuminated. My lungs locked. Its brow was heavy, its jaw powerful, its hair thick and tangled. But its eyes, God help me, its eyes were unmistakably human. Not wild, not mindless, not empty. Human, conflicted, remembering. Eyes that held recognition, pain, sorrow, loss. And in that moment I understood. This wasn't the forest's animal. This wasn't a legend. This was a person trapped inside something monstrous. A being who knew what it once was. Who remembered the carvings not as mythology, but as memory. The creature took a slow step toward me. Not threatening, measured, testing, curious. It raised one hand, massive and trembling, and placed it on the carvings behind it. The image of a human turning into a creature. Then its eyes returned to mine. It was trying to tell me something, begging me to understand. History, origin, transformation, pain. And then something else, something deeper. Silence, fear, hiding. Not from me, from the government, from the division that fenced this land, from whatever force had shaped it long ago. My hand tightened around my jacket. I whispered, barely audible, "I see you." The creature inhaled sharply, a shudder rolling through its frame. Its hand lowered, its gaze softened. Then, branches snapped behind it. Metal clicked. Floodlights flared through the trees. Voices shouted from the fence line. The creature's eyes widened, not in rage, but in despair. It looked back at me one last time. Then it turned, moving with speed no creature that size should have, and disappeared into the trees, swallowed by darkness and rain. Agents burst into the clearing seconds later. Their lights swept the stones, their rifles raised, their radios crackling with panic. One man grabbed my arm. Hard. "Sheriff, what the hell are you doing here?" But I couldn't answer, because I was still staring into the darkness, where those human eyes had vanished. And for the first time in my life, I understood the carvings completely. They weren't warnings. They were a story, a birth, a transformation, a history the government feared above all others. A history the creature still remembered. A history that wasn't dead. Not yet. Not ever. The agents hauled me from the clearing as if I were the trespasser, not the witness to something impossible. And as they dragged me away, I realized something terrifying. The creature hadn't attacked. It hadn't threatened. It had tried to communicate, to reach me, to share the truth. And now the truth was mine alone. Dangerous, unholy, alive. I've carried this story in my chest for so long it's fused with my bones. I never wrote it down, never told a soul, never even whispered it to the trees when I walked past the fence on quiet mornings. But tonight, as an old man with more yesterdays than tomorrows left, I can finally feel the truth clawing its way out of me. It won't let me die with it locked inside. So I'll say it now. I saw Bigfoot. I saw what he truly is. And I saw the carvings that told his origin story. One the government buried, fenced, sterilized, and erased. Even if no one believes me, the truth deserves breath before I lose mine. In the days after that night in the woods, the agents tightened their grip around the church forest like a fist closing around a fragile throat. Floodlights blazed through the trees at all hours. Search teams combed the ridge with trackers and thermal drones. Trucks rolled in with equipment I couldn't identify. Machines that hummed with unnatural frequency, their vibrations carrying through the soil like a warning. The fence grew taller, thicker, reinforced. Then razor wire was added. then armed guards, then a sign that chilled everyone to the bone. Authorized access only, deadly force permitted. Churchgoers avoided the back lot entirely. Children were forbidden to play outside after sunset. Even the wind felt watched. Pastor Alden tried to approach the perimeter once. Just once. They put him in the dirt with a rifle, but before he even came within 20 feet. After that, the congregation learned to keep their prayers quiet. And the forest changed. Not in the way a forest normally changes. Not with seasons or time. But as if something inside it was waking up. I began to hear things no human should ever hear. Scrapes against the fence at midnight. Deep, deliberate breathing echoing through the trees. Something large pacing along the perimeter, matching the footsteps of the guards. Pausing whenever they paused. Drawing closer when they drifted away. One night, while sitting outside my cabin, I heard a sound like a stone being dragged across a riverbed. Then a thump. Then silence. I knew that sound. I had heard it once in the clearing, when the creature traced the carvings with its hand. As the nights passed, sightings became whispers. A shape on the ridge at sunset. A shadow beside the gravestones, tall enough to blot out the moon. A figure moving between trees without breaking a single branch. The echo of a low hum. Not animal, not wind, but something that sounded almost painfully, like a voice learning to speak again. People stopped walking their dogs after dark. Hunters stopped going into the woods completely. And the missing persons began. First a hiker from out of town. Then a drifter. Then a teenager who thought the fence was just a story parents used to scare them. None of them were ever found. The government never admitted anything happened. They never released statements. Never asked the public for information. Never even pretended to care. They simply expanded the restricted zone. Again and again. Until the forest behind the church wasn't just fenced off. It became a place you didn't even speak about anymore. A ghost inside a town full of breathing people. I kept quiet. For years. Because silence is what they demanded. And fear, real fear, makes obedience a habit. But silence has a half-life. It decays, breaks down, leaks out. As I aged, certain things became harder to ignore. The nights when I felt watched. The moments I'd see a silhouette on the ridge, just standing there, until the fog swallowed it again. The way the ground sometimes shook softly. The way large animals shake the earth when they move. The way the carvings behind the church appeared in my dreams. Not as stone, not as relics, but as memories. His memories. The creature had looked at them like a man looks at a childhood photograph. With recognition and grief. I know what I saw in those eyes. Not hatred. Not hunger. Not the wild emptiness of an animal. But comprehension. Regret. A deep, fractured sorrow. A soul trapped inside something it didn't choose to become. And when he looked back at me, that night in the clearing, surrounded by ancient symbols and forbidden truth, I felt something break inside me, because he wasn't just a legend. He wasn't a beast or a myth or a shadow meant to frighten children. He was evidence. Evidence of what we did. Of what the land remembers. Of what the government fears. Evidence of humanity twisted into something monstrous. And still somehow retaining the memory of who it once was. I'm telling this now because I can feel time closing its hand around me. And because I know what's coming. It's not a guess. It's not superstition. It's a certainty carved into stone long before my great-grandfather was born. Those carvings behind the church, the ones no civilians ever saw again, weren't just warnings. They were a story, a history of a transformation, a merging. A manipulation of flesh and spirit, a ritual of change, a timeline carved into rock long before the government arrived, but somehow foretelling everything they later tried to hide. A story humanity buried, a story they feared, a story he remembered, and I believe, with every shivering bone in my body, that history has begun to stir again. Maybe it's the silence, maybe it's the disappearances. Maybe it's the footprints that keep appearing along the new fence line, larger than before, deeper, more frequent. Or maybe it's the night, 2 months ago, when I stepped onto my porch and saw him standing there. Yes, him, tall, still, watching me with eyes that were too human for his monstrous frame. He didn't move. He didn't threaten. He simply existed. A reminder, a witness, an origin story that refused to stay carved in stone. I whispered his name, the name no one else knew, the one I never told another soul. I see you. And for the first time, he nodded. Once, slowly, with understanding. Then the forest swallowed him again. I haven't seen him since, but I can feel it. In the way the ground vibrates on cold nights. In the way the wind refuses to enter the restricted zone. In the way the agents have doubled their forces without explanation. In the way the carvings burn behind my eyes every time I close them. Something is coming. Something old. Something inevitable. Something born of us. And buried by them. And remembered by him. So I'm telling this now while I still can. The carvings weren't warnings. They were history. Asterisk asterisk. And history doesn't stay buried forever.